On this week's running back episode, Jake tried a new trick and made himself disappear. So I figured, you know what? I'm going to give it a shot as well. I've been practicing, so let's see what happens. Headliner Nation, are you ready? 3, 2, 1. What's up, Headliner Nation? Thanks so much for tuning in to another episode of the Fantasy Headliners, a joint episode for positions this week, quarterbacks and tight ends together, because we got to get you a lot of information. 3 games on Thanksgiving Day that you're going to need some information for. So we figured we put out as much as we possibly can before kickoff. And to better serve you, figured, we'll just put quarterbacks and tight ends together so you can get all that information at the same time. Before we jump into all of that information, let me go ahead and just wrap back around to last week. I know that there was some difficulties last week, and it was a really odd week. Let's go ahead and take a look at our transparency. For quarterbacks, not great at all. My first time this season being under 50% for any position. It hurt, Headliner Nation. There was a couple of good ones, though. Darnold was a good one. Fitzmagic, Aaron Rodgers, Carson Wentz. I nailed those picks. But there were some obvious ones I should have just rolled with. Jameis Winston was one. I should have just put him on that side. I mean, there was some. Russell Wilson ended up being a miss. Matt Ryan ended up being a miss. So there was a lot of misses last week that just people didn't see coming. So unfortunately, under 50% for tight ends. A lot better, though. It's 63% for last week. Really glad to at least be over 60% there. Some good sits that I called out last week. And then, of course, the Ben Watson debacle, which we're going to be calling it from here on out. So, ladies and gentlemen, let's jump into it. Let's talk about all of our matchups. The buys are done, so we've got 16 matchups to talk about this week. Let's jump into it right now and talk about our quarterbacks and tight ends. First matchup on the slate, obviously the Detroit Lions on Thanksgiving Day. They're going to be hosting the Chicago Bears. Now, we don't love a whole lot about this slate, especially at the quarterback and tight end position. You've got Mitchell Trubisky. I talked about him as a potential streaming option in the waiver wire video if you wanted to get a little frisky. However, I told you then, I'm not that frisky. So we're going to stay away from Mitchell Trubisky unless you absolutely need to and you're looking at like a 2 quarterback, a super flex type of league, then maybe. But in a 1 QB league, find something else. He's only averaging 12 points per game. For the Detroit quarterback situation, doesn't look good. Driscoll is dealing with a hamstring injury right now. If he can't go, then it's going to be David Blau. I'm not going with either of these guys. Even if Driscoll were to play with the hamstring injury, one of the things that's given him a little bit of upside so far this year is his rushing ability. He's not going to have that this week. Then for the tight end position for Chicago, Shaheen, Brownecker, one of those guys, not going to roll with them. And then TJ Hawkinson, he's had some really good potential matchups this year and hasn't done anything. So once again, I'm going to stay away from him this week. Tight end 22 on the season. It's been all downhill since week 1. I'm not going to invest in him this week. I'm going to find somebody else to do that. All right, now let's talk about the Buffalo and Dallas matchup. This could be a really good game. A little bit split here on what I'm going to be doing. So Josh Allen, Dak Prescott, both of them are going to be starts. Allen is the QB2 since week 7. He even in a tough matchup last week, still played really well against Denver. So I'm definitely going to continue to roll him out. He's a guy that you're not sitting for really any reason right now. Dak Prescott, I am going to go with him as a start, but really low upside this week. Buffalo's giving up the 3rd fewest fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks. Don't love the matchup again. However, I am going to roll with him at home. They need to bounce back after that loss. We're going to see if Dak can take care of business. For Dawson Knox, Dallas hasn't been good against the tight end position. Last week, Watson, he was a dud against them. Knox, I'm still going to go ahead and look at as a potential tight end 1 this week because honestly, if you look at the tight end position last week, it was awful. If we figured it out, if Ben Watson would have had like 1 catch for 45 yards and a touchdown, he would have been like the tight end 4 or something like that last week. So even with that being said, Dawson Knox is a name to consider. Witten we're going to stay away from. Jarwin we're going to stay away from, allowing the 2nd fewest fantasy points per game to opposing tight ends, Buffalo. A lot of you were let down by Matt Ryan last week, but I'm going to put some faith in him again this week. Last week was just a blip on the radar. He hasn't been great since coming back from his injury, but I'm still going to put him in my lineup this week if I own him. Breeze is going to be a start. Ryan is going to be a start. Atlanta, giving up over 21 fantasy points per game. Obviously, they got knocked around a little bit by Jameis Winston and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers last week. For Matt Ryan, New Orleans giving up more than 18 fantasy points per game. Again, he hasn't been himself since the injury, but even with the injury and a little bit of missed time, he's still the quarterback 11 on the season. Again, with a little bit, not a whole lot of missed time, and then also with basically some down performances since coming back, still the quarterback 11. Jared Cook is going to be a start for me. Touchdowns in 4 of the last 5 games. He's got big play upside right now as well. Over 13 yards per reception since week 5, getting more and more comfortable. And with Graham and Stocker this week, we're going to sit them. Not a whole lot of volume. Russell Gage is really that third receiving option on the team right now. But we have to keep an eye on Julio Jones. I want to see what happens with him. If Julio were to be out, I'll look towards Graham a little bit, but that's not anything that I'm going to make a call on right now, especially this early in the week. Check back on the rankings episode, though, and then we'll talk about it a little bit more then if Julio is going to end up missing the game or be limited in any way, shape, or form. We're splitting it even on this matchup for the New York Jets and the Cincinnati Bengals. Darnold's going to be a start, and Griffin is going to be a start, while Dalton and Eifert are going to be sits. Darnold is the quarterback 2 the last 2 weeks, and Cincinnati is giving up the 3rd most fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks. Yes, they held Mason Rudolph in check, but no, Sam Darnold is better than Mason Rudolph, so that doesn't matter anyway. So we are going to go with Darnold this week. And for Dalton, this is going to be a sit. Jets are giving up the 7th fewest fantasy points per game the last couple of weeks. I talked about this on the waiver wire episode that the Jets defense has been getting better and better and better over the last several weeks, and they're really playing at a pretty high level right now. Could be better, obviously, but they're getting better each and every week. I'm going to go ahead and sit Dalton, his first game back since being benched a few weeks ago. Griffin's going to be a start. Cincinnati, the 9th most red zone receptions and the 8th most red zone targets to opposing tight ends right now. So a lot of touchdown upside for Griffin this week. And for Tyler Eifert, he continues to be unproductive. We're going to go ahead and skip over his name when we submit lineups this week. How dare I go against Ryan Tannehill last week? He's a guy that I've been talking about for a while, and then I was like, yeah, you know what? We're not going to play him this week. Shame on me for making that call. However, we're going to put him back in the start column this week. Tannehill is the quarterback 11 since week 6 when he took over as the starter. He's averaging over 20 fantasy points per game during that time frame as well. He's one of the better quarterbacks right now in fantasy football, which is really odd to say. For Jacoby Brissett, we're going to sit him. He still doesn't look fully healthy. You could see that he had a huge brace on his knee on Thursday Night Football last week. They're going to rely on the run game again this week, I believe, just like they did with Jonathan Williams last week. So I'm going to go ahead and leave him on the bench. We just found out Delaney Walker headed to the IR, so Jonnu Smith. Thought about it a little bit more. Thought about I might want to play him, but I'm going to go ahead and list him as a sit. Outside of a couple of good performances, he hasn't done a whole lot. I'm not really going to rely on him this week either. And with Jack Doyle, he's going to be a start. No Eric Ebron. He is on the IR moving forward. Doyle does have at least 4 targets in all but 3 games this season, so expect that volume to tick up a little bit more for him. For this matchup, I will roll out Carson Wentz and Zach Ertz. Liked Ertz last week, did not like Wentz, and that kind of ended up hitting pretty well. However, for this week, I like them to get back to that threshold that we need, especially for Zach Ertz, picking up that volume and being that guy at tight end. For Carson Wentz, I think he can get to 18 fantasy points against the Miami Dolphins this week. For Ryan Fitzpatrick, it's either boom or bust. He's either going to throw for around 300 yards and a couple of touchdowns, or he's going to throw for under 200 yards, maybe a touchdown, couple of interceptions. I think we're going to see a performance more like that against the Eagles this week. It's kind of an odd scenario as well. A weird correlation that I'm looking into a little bit more, trying to get some more information on, but quarterbacks in terms of fantasy points are not scoring that well against the Eagles. However, wide receivers are scoring fairly well against the Eagles. So something to keep an eye on. I'm doing a little bit of research on why that may be. And then for Mike Gesicki and Dallas Goedert, if he doesn't find the end zone, he's not typically a startable option. He has to score for him to be a startable option. I'm going to go ahead and move away from that a little bit this week. I don't want to play a touchdown dependent play this week when I could be looking at some other volume opportunity like a guy, Jack Doyle, who's going to see more volume this week. And then with Mike Gesicki, kind of the same thing. If he doesn't score, he's not going to put up a ton of points. He's been a little bit of a roller coaster. One week he'll have a great performance, he'll disappear. He had a good performance last week, so this would technically be his week to disappear. I just don't want to trust him this week. For the Packers and Giants, is Aaron Rodgers going to bounce back this week? Yes, I do believe he will. New York Giants giving up the 9th most fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks. However, for Daniel Jones, we're going to sit him. Green Bay is giving up the 10th fewest. Yes, Jimmy Garoppolo had a pretty good game against them last week. However, not expecting the same out of Daniel Jones this week. Barkley's not healthy. Golden Tate's in the concussion protocol. As of right now, doesn't appear he's going to play this week. No final word on that yet. Those are two really big options to be missing. Barkley's not missing. He just doesn't look like himself. He doesn't look healthy right now. You've been able to see that. For the Giants, for tight ends, I'm going to start anybody who plays for them. And again, this is a situation we need to monitor closely. Evan Ingram and Rhett Ellison have been those two. However, on the waiver wire show, I mentioned a sneaky third option for you. So with that being said, anybody from the New York Giants, continue to keep an eye on this. You're going to have to see the rankings episode to get more information. But when that rankings episode comes out, I will give you more information on who I will be playing for that position this week. And for Jimmy Graham, no dice. Not going to be playing him. Giants get up the third fewest fantasy points to opposing tight ends, and he really just hasn't been that good this season. Cleveland seems to be ticking again, especially on the offensive side of the ball. Baker Mayfield playing a lot better of late. However, in this matchup in Pittsburgh, I'm not going to be rolling with him this week. Delvin Hodges is going to be a sit for me. He may not be bad, but he's definitely not the answer. Again, we're looking for better options, safer options at quarterback this week. Baker Mayfield is going to be a sit. The Steelers' defense is why they've only allowed 2 200-yard passing efforts in the last 8 games that they have played. So not great performances from quarterbacks against them so far. David Njoku is going to be a sit. Now, it could end up being, he might not end up playing. He was really close last week. Didn't end up quite getting there. I'm going to list him there for right now. Keep an eye on the rankings episode. First game back, Landry, OBJ, Hunt, and Chubb. Enough said. Those are the top 4 targets. Njoku, not really a guy that I want to throw in there right away. And Vance McDonald, we're going to list him as a sit. The last time he played with Devlin Hodges, he went 1 target, 1 reception, 5 receiving yards. Okay. It also depends on the health of the receivers, though. We're going to keep an eye on that this week. Anybody ends up missing again, then maybe we have to reconsider Vance McDonald. But for as of now, he's a sit. In this matchup, Greg Olsen is the only guy that I'm considering out of these positions. Washington's giving up over 13 fantasy points per game to opposing tight ends, so definitely could be a good day for Greg Olsen. But Haskins doesn't have enough upside. Kyle Allen doesn't have enough upside. Jimmy Sprinkle doesn't have enough upside. None of these guys have enough upside for me this week to put them out there. Haskins, I mentioned this last week on the rankings episode. He could mess around and get into the top 20 quarterbacks because he's going to have potentially enough volume. However, I don't want to go out there and risk it either, especially if your league takes advantage of interceptions. You get -2 points, -4 points, whatever it may be. Got to be careful of things like that. Not going to risk it this week. All right, I'm not going to be doubting Jameis Winston again. Atlanta had been playing so well on the defensive side of the ball since coming back from the bye that I thought maybe Winston would mess around and throw several interceptions and maybe just have a rough day. Didn't end up happening. Going forward, though, we're going to be starting him this week against Jacksonville. Winston's volume is all you need from him. He has 6 straight 300-yard games coming into this game, so could end up being his 7th straight. For Nick Foles, Ryan was bad last week against Tampa, but I'm still going to roll Foles out this week. Tampa Bay still allowing the 2nd most fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks. Howard and Bray are going to be sits for me. Jacksonville allows the 9th fewest fantasy points. It's always a crapshoot, especially with Godwin and Evan being the main guys there. And Ronald Jones is seeing a little bit more in the rushing game. They got to get him some volume, and they've been doing that. And for the Jacksonville tight ends, we're going to list them as sits because none of them have been fantasy relevant at all this season. Lamar Jackson is a for sure start every single week, and that doesn't change against the San Francisco 49ers this week. We're definitely going to still be putting him in. Don't overthink it if you own him. He's in your lineup. Jimmy Garoppolo is going to be a sit, though. Baltimore giving up the 4th fewest fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks. They have also allowed less than 250 passing yards once in the last 7. They've only allowed more than 250 passing yards once in the last 7 games. I knew I was misreading my notes there. Apologize, but only allowed more than 250 passing yards one time in the last 7 games. With George Kittle, dude, playing on a broken ankle, that's tough, man. I can't believe that he went out and had the performance he had the other night, but we're going to start him this week. Andrews, same thing. San Francisco has been tough against tight ends, so temper your expectations a little bit, but he continues to be the number 1 option for Lamar Jackson. Got a whole lot of starts in this matchup, and when you play the Arizona Cardinals, typically you're going to be starting a lot of people anyway. Jared Goff, he has not thrown a touchdown in 3 weeks. That's right, in the month of November, he does not have a touchdown pass. That's kind of odd to think about, but he's been that bad. However, for this week, I will go with him because Arizona allows the most fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks. And for Kyler Murray, he is the QB6. He's not as dynamic as Lamar Jackson. Okay, but Lamar Jackson just went in and took advantage of the Los Angeles Rams in Los Angeles. Okay, so a little bit of that dual threat capability from Kyler Murray might be able to help this week, boost him up. Definitely a start for me. For the tight ends, Everett's going to be a start for me if he plays. If he does not play, then it's going to be Higbee. Now, we have to really monitor this. If we think he's going to be in any way, shape, or form limited, then we just stay away from the position. It's a juicy matchup. Arizona gives up more points to tight ends than any other team in the National Football League by quite a margin. It's like 5.5 points or so more than the next closest team. But you don't want to risk it either. Everett ended up missing basically the entire second half. He has a knee injury. We'll see what happens. If he's for sure ruled out, then I'll run Tyler Higbee out there. And for Charles Clay, we're not doing anything with him. We're not even going to consider it this week. Henry will be my only start in this matchup. Don't love it for either team. Rivers is going to be a sit. Denver giving up the fifth fewest fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks. And then for Brandon Allen, we're not going to run with him either. He hasn't been a real fancy viable quarterback this season, so we're not going to try and get cute and start him. And then for Fant, really wanted to start Fant this week. However, the Chargers have been pretty good against tight ends, allowing the seventh fewest fantasy points to them. So I'm not going to run with Fant this week either. I'll go ahead and leave him on the bench. A little bit more upside in other places this week. I really want to put Derek Carr in that start column, especially in a matchup where you're going to see a lot of negative game script. But Kansas City's been too good against the pass this year. I don't want to test it, especially coming from a guy who was just benched in the third quarter of last week. He'll be back out there. He'll likely play a full game. However, I'm not going to go ahead and put him out there this week against that defense. However, on the other side, Patrick Mahomes, you're always starting him. Travis Kelce, Darren Waller, we're going to start them. Oakland and Kansas City giving up the 5th and 6th most fantasy points per game to opposing tight ends. So both of these guys could have really big performances this week. Deshaun Watson's going to be a start for me this week. Yes, the New England Patriots kept Dak Prescott in check last week, but was that really them or was it the weather? I still think this is a good defense. I'm not discrediting them at all. However, with Deshaun Watson, if you own him, you play him. We might just temper expectations a little bit this week in this matchup. Brady's going to be a sit because of his injury, though. Fells is going to be a sit. Akins is going to be a sit. And then, of course, Watson this week is a sit. Don't worry, ladies and gentlemen. We are not including him in the starts this week. Don't worry about that. So Deshaun Watson really the only guy in this matchup that I'm looking for. Everyone else, very little upside for me. Cousins and Wilson, both of them definite starts for me this week. Hollister is going to be a start for me as well. Didn't have a great performance last week, however. He almost had a touchdown. If Russell Wilson hadn't overthrown him in the end zone, he was basically wide open. And then for Kyle Rudolph, he's been finding the end zone more often. He's becoming a bigger part of the game plan. As of this recording on Wednesday, Adam Thielen still had not practiced, so a good opportunity for Kyle Rudolph again this week against Seattle. And then going with Irv Smith Jr., I've seen some people ask about him and whether or not he could be a volume play with Adam Thielen being out. Kyle Rudolph continues to be the guy right now. There you have it, ladies and gentlemen. Good luck this week. Set your lineups again. The early game, Detroit and Chicago on Thursday morning for Thanksgiving. Happy Thanksgiving to all of you. One thing I'm thankful for this year is this community. Really thankful for all your support and being here for us all season long, interacting with us and helping us build such a great community. So everybody out there, if you celebrate Thanksgiving, have an awesome Thanksgiving. Enjoy time with friends, family, loved ones, those that are closest to you. I'll be enjoying some food. Have been dieting a little bit lately, restricting myself, but don't worry. On Thanksgiving, gloves are off. We're going to go at it. Make sure that you hit the like button. Make sure you comment below with any questions. And as always, subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. Ladies and gentlemen, thanks so much for tuning in to another episode of the Fantasy Headliners. I'll see you on the next one. Happy Thanksgiving. Have a good one.